I think people totally are misanalyzing the situation this offseason because he's a franchise player.
Yeah.
It's not like he's a free agent. There's a whole mess of stuff to navigate because of that. I think he's at a severe disadvantage to cash in under these circumstances of the tag where the Ravens can match.
Welcome to Unexpected Points. I am your host, Kevin Cole. We have a great interview today. I'm going to be speaking with Mike Sando from The Athletic. He also hosts the Football GM podcast, which comes into the larger Athletic Football Show feed every Thursday. We'll talk a little bit about the work he does in that podcast. We'll talk about his insights from the owner meetings that we just had in Arizona. This new, I don't know if you want to call it a scandal, but a controversy going on with Arizona there and their ownership and former employees. Plus, we'll get in a lot into his QB tiers article, the methodology for that comes out every July. And I use that article and the data within and looking how front office personnel and coaches and others view different quarterbacks in relation to Lamar Jackson, who we talk about quite a bit, his situation, why it's a little bit more unique and not quite as simple as being a free agent or having 2 first-round picks traded for a player because of the franchise tag and everything else that comes into play there. If you want to follow Mike, you can follow him on Twitter. His handle is at Sando, Sando NFL. And again, one of the most highly respected guys in the industry. Was an honor to have him on the show here. I hope you enjoyed the interview. And if you're not already subscribed here, subscribe to the podcast. Also find my Substack, unexpectedpoints.substack.com, where I go over all of my different research. And as I mentioned, a pretty long, thorough article on Lamar Jackson, how he should be valued, the positives and the negatives. And there's some on each side of that versus public opinion on how I'm viewing him. And now let's get to Mike Sando. Welcome to the podcast, Mike Sando. Thank you for joining me.
It's great to be here. I mean, you're the first podcast. I do a lot of podcasts. You're the first guy in a Pro Football Reference t-shirt. So I'm going to be ordering one as soon as we get off for the amount of time. Whatever they charge, I should pay it for the amount of stuff that I've used from their site. So good for you.
Yeah, I know. I was telling you before we got on, I feel the same for all the data that I've scraped off of there. Maybe I should just give them like a free promotion. Just put get a link, get a link in the show notes, ready to go. You can get your Pro Football Reference gear.
Yeah.
Also.
Absolutely. It'll be a hit, I'm sure, all around town here, in my Pro Football Reference shirt. So good to be here. Thanks for having me on. It was good seeing you at the league meetings too. Or no, at the Combine.
Yeah, at the Combine. Haven't made it to league meetings yet. We will talk about that. Yeah, it was good to see you at the Combine too. It was funny. I was able to use my physical presence to motivate you to get a subscription to the Substack. So I appreciate that. I was thinking it. So you got my vibes that I was putting out there. So I appreciate that. And we always have. I feel like we talked once before at the Combine too. We have some pretty good conversations, but not too often. But it did remind me to the fact that I wanted to ask you to come on here, and you were, willing to oblige. And we also have some Lamar Jackson-ish sort of stuff that I wanted to talk to you about because I love your QB tiers article. I know that's a July thing, but it's also very relevant as a data point that now I'm using it going back. And then you mentioned the league meetings. I also want to talk to you about that because you were there. I think it's maybe a little bit of an underplayed news cycle type of topic. And the story here with the Cardinals and Bidwell, I think that's also like maybe a little bit underplayed news story topic. So why don't we get into the league meetings first? Maybe just from a general perspective, because I haven't been, it's less well attended than something like the Combine. At the same time, you're getting some pretty good access to head coaches there, to GMs there, to ownership there, which I think may be like the piece of the puzzle that gets, I don't know, either over or underplayed by people, depending upon the different team. Just because we don't have that much access to them, we don't hear that much about their thoughts and feelings and opinions, and we don't really know how much they're influencing things. What sort of feedback do you get from being there and seeing them in person?
Yeah, so I agree with you. I think the owners are not held to account as they should be. We are so quick to criticize the coach or the GM because we don't really fully understand the impact the owner's having behind the scenes, right? And I think if we zoomed out a little bit, and like I think I'm going to do this. I've done this some for GMs, but I think I'm going to do an owner's thing where I just keep what their record is. Maybe you have a little ledger out there. This is your record as an owner, and maybe
Yeah.
here's the coaches you've hired, right? Things like that, because we really don't think about the owners enough. So the owners' meetings are usually held in either Orlando or West Palm Beach or Arizona, nice warm places in spring. They usually, from the league will start coming in maybe about Saturday, and then by Tuesday night, Wednesday, they're out of there. But what's so different about it is that it's only like owners, team presidents, a lot of salary cap people, general managers, and head coaches, and their families. So that introduces a different dynamic. When you're at the combine, you might be out at a bar at 8 o'clock at night, and there's the offensive coordinator of the Colts is there or whatever. No problem. If you know them or you're with someone who knows them, you could have a good conversation. A little bit of a different setting when they're pushing a stroller, right? Or they're going to spend some time. So, it's a little bit less formal, more relaxed, with some formalized access. The formalized access is on 2 different mornings. They have half the league's head coaches sitting at a table, meaning there's 16 tables for the AFC on, let's say, Monday morning at 8 a.m. And there's 10 seats at each table. If you media, you could go sit down for as long as you want with Sean McVay or whatever, or whoever, if it's the AFC, Bill Belichick or whoever. And those are all on the record. But I like that because it gives you a chance to just sort of observe the vibe, right? Like I was interested in Sean McVay just because of all the, was he going to go to TV? So I just stood there 6 feet away from Sean McVay for 15 minutes. It's just a good taking inventory, right? But if I was doing a story on, proposed rules change on the punt return, I could have gone to 16 tables and quickly got my question in and had maybe something that was pretty decent. It was very funny during the AFC one. We'll get to Lamar Jackson a little bit later. But Lamar Jackson announced on Twitter that he'd requested a trade right as John Harbaugh had sat down at his table. Usually before John Harbaugh would speak to the media, they would have a session with his PR guy or whatever. They'd figure out, hey, let's stay on this message, whatever. He just had to roll with that. And that was kind of fun and funny. But that is the formalized part of it. Maybe a news conference or two with the commissioner, or sometimes, maybe the PR director for the Falcons will say, hey, Arthur Blank will be available if you're interested on Tuesday at 2 p.m. But then there's just a whole bunch more of informal interactions where, as a reporter, these people, you respect the fact that they may be there with their families, and it's not just I take that into account. Like, I'm not just going to be like stalking people there, like popping out from around the corner. Hey, good to see you. I think there's some people who kind of do that, and that's not how I would do it. Yeah. But at the same time, I've been doing this 25 years. I have a lot of contacts already. If you're trying to build contacts, this is a rare opportunity to be there and see people. It's slow. You might feel like as a reporter, you're not, quote unquote, getting as much, right? But those informal interactions and just seeing people while you're sitting they had this outdoor kind of restaurant thing in Arizona, just sitting there, people may just come by and talk for 30 seconds. For me, that's incredibly valuable because you do this year after year, you see people, you're just saying hello. It's just good to see people in person. It doesn't have to be an interview. You don't have to be asking them about even football stuff. Talk to people, learn about their families, those sorts of things. For me, it wouldn't be enough on its own, but it's just a piece of the calendar year of things that have value.
No, I'm interested in like these informal sort of meetings. I know at the Combine, there were a number of GMs and head coaches who are scheduled to speak. And then I've talked to some beat reporter types where they have like another little session, maybe with a few people who are in the beat reporters for that particular team. Obviously, we're talking about, I assume, mostly on the record stuff. I don't know how it works here. I mean, you're a big J journalist. We'll put you in that category, as opposed to like the Substackers, the bloggers, the tweeters, the other people who may be there. when you have these informal conversations, is there like an understanding that this is like background type of information? Maybe even especially at the combine when you're talking about those conversations at the bar. I could think famously a conversation that Sean Payton had with Evan Silva, and anyone who knows this conversation, he repeated it over and over again, things that he was talking about with players where I'm not sure if you would like reveal the same sort of thing if you were hearing it from Sean Payton at the bar.
Correct. So I think that's on an individual basis. I think the people that are there, the coaches or the general managers, must take into account who they're speaking with and what their relationship is with that person. Right. Yeah. I totally understand, which, by the way, I don't buy your distinction between the big J and the little J. I think there's a lot of great people in a lot of different places.
They're big J's. They don't buy that. They don't buy that distinction.
Yeah. Well, but I do think, in the role that I'm in now is different than when I was on a beat. I think one of the things I advise of any reporter is always play the long game. What I mean by that is that one thing you find out at the bar. I mean, if you go with that or put it out in the next 5 minutes, I mean, whoa, right? It would be kind of like if you and I off the camera had a conversation and you just happened to mention some plans you had for your Substack. And then I just tweeted a reference to it. I mean, you'd be like, oh, that's not really a breach of confidence, but that's not really what I was intending. Right. So for me, the more times you can, people have to know you can have a conversation with them in that setting. Right. Now, sometimes you have to be on the record. Hey, look, I want to get you, I'm doing a story on this, that you need it. But I think you start getting into, no one's going to want to talk to you if every time you're having a drink with somebody and you can find out a lot of things and get a feel for things that really help you do a good job. But if you just ran with it right then and put a headline on it, then no one would want to talk to you.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you mentioned, a lot of the type of work that you're doing, whether it's the QB tiers articles that we're talking about, or these larger NFL issues, like the proportion of information that you're getting, which is not the on the record, like I'm going to put the quote out to make a splash sort of thing, is much, much higher than it may be for someone else who's just, looking for retweets or something like that on social media.
Yeah. So like that breakfast thing I was talking about, where they had the 16 tables for one day with the AFC and NFC. That's all fair game. You go ask anybody what you want, and if they happen to say something, you just use it. And that stuff's good stuff. Sometimes, I mean, you can get a feel for what a coach says about a player, right? Or Bill Belichick's talking about Mac Jones, or Robert Kraft was speaking. I mean, those were on the record conversations that shed light, that helped people, right? And so that's a huge component of these things, but that's a little bit less of what I do in the role that I'm in now. And I've been a beat reporter I was a beat reporter on covering the Seahawks for 9 years. I covered the NFC West for ESPN for probably 5 years, where you really do have to produce a lot of content every day. Whereas now it's a little bit more, hey, I'm working on some projects. I can have conversations with people that aren't necessarily, an interview for a story tomorrow, right?
Yeah. I think we also had some conversation at the combine about this kind of like bad feedback that comes from social media sometimes that ends up bleeding into people's reporting and can end up being a little bit of a disaster.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about these meetings when it comes to ownership. And I mentioned the story with the Arizona Cardinals. I mean, we'll start to get into that a little bit too, because I think that flew under the radar. Well, let's just talk Cardinals now. So I'll admit that it did not really hit me in a way where I really thought about it that much. But then I started to read into more of the details of what went on here. I know that you wrote about it, what went on with Terry McDonough there and the accusations back and forth. And maybe we're just all a little, I don't know, we're all like a nerd to some of this ownership stuff because like Dan Snyder has set such a high bar for being outraged at ownership stuff. But I don't know. I was kind of shocked when I started to look into it more. And when you look back at what's happened with Steve Keim in the past and some other things there, like all this stuff that's going on at Arizona.
Oh, yeah. And I think Arizona is one of those teams that doesn't get covered as much as Patriots or whatever, just because of the market, right? It's a market where you have a lot of people who aren't from Arizona. It's not like the Vikings are to Minnesota. So I think there's a little bit of that. they're a team that just doesn't get as much intense coverage. People aren't as familiar, aren't paying as close of attention. But this is a really potentially consequential situation, I think, because it ties into the Steve Wilkes, Brian Flores deal for me.
Right.
So basically, to just reset, Terry McDonough was a high ranking, as high as number 2 underneath the general manager in Arizona from 2014 until 2000, I think, 18. And then he had a series of demotions, 2019, 20, 21. Now he's out. And so Terry McDonough filed a complaint with the league office requesting arbitration in which he accused Mike Bidwell, the owner of the Cardinals, of authorizing a scheme whereby during suspended general manager Steve Keim's 5-week suspension in 2018, other executives could communicate with him illicitly using burner phones, which was amazing,
It's like The
right?
Wire.
So
We're talking about The Wire right now.
yeah, totally. I was picturing like Saul Goodman with his storefront with all those burner phones that he was selling. But so then Mike Bidwell came out and said, no, actually, there was a burner phone thing going on once, or the Cardinals said once Bidwell found out about it, then he put a stop to it. So there's a different spin on that. But
right, via the PR firm. It was a lawyer or a PR firm. I can't remember. It might have been a PR firm.
Oh yeah, so this outside PR firm. There was a story. I think, was the guy's name Jim McCarthy? Does that sound
Something
familiar
like
to you?
that.
I think
Yeah,
it was.
yeah.
Yeah, someone wrote a piece about him. He's apparently does like kind of a little bit of a tack dog inside the beltway type PR, like real aggressive PR. And they put out a statement on Terry McDonough that just obliterated him, not just
I mean,
as
it
an
was
employee.
insane. It was
They
insane.
attacked him as a man, as a husband, as a father. With
"Quote
some
unquote
stuff that was
extreme domestic violence." It wasn't even like they found out things
yeah.
about domestic violence and not even really detailing what it was. Not that they necessarily want to or had to, but you don't just throw around extreme domestic violence with nothing backing it, right?
I thought it was unbelievable, and I really think it was like, hey, wait a minute. So Terry McDonough accused the Cardinals of retaliating against him for refusing to do the burner phone thing. So that was the gist of this. That hey,
He and Wilkes too. So Wilkes presumably might have knowledge of this also.
Right. So McDonough is saying, hey, I said I wouldn't do this. And Steve Wilkes said we wouldn't do this with the burner phone. And after that happened, Steve was fired after 1 year. He doesn't say explicitly it was because of that.
Right.
And then Terry McDonough was demoted after that, he claims, because he wouldn't do the burner phone thing, which the Cardinals dispute. But what is so interesting about this to me is the parallel with the Miami Dolphins situation with Brian Flores, because if you think about why he says he was fired, he wouldn't go along with an illicit scheme to tank, and he wouldn't go along with the illicit plan to accidentally bump into Tom Brady at the marina so they could have a conversation. Remember? So
allegedly Tom Brady.
Allegedly
was that confirmed
Tom Brady.
Or
well, it was reported, but basically the idea was that hey, Flores would not do unethical things and paid a price. Okay,
yes.
So now you have Terry McDonough kind of saying the same thing. We were asked to do unethical things by the owner and refused. Well, they just eviscerated Terry McDonough with this statement to try to hurt his credibility. But if Steve Wilkes concurs or confirms that, either directly to the commissioner or publicly or in some other way, I think it gives what Terry McDonough is saying additional credence. I don't think there's anyone putting out a report on questioning Steve Wilkes' character like that, right? So even though Wilkes, he is suing the Cardinals, he's obviously not unbiased in this thing, but I think he's a credible witness, and so that's where I think it could get interesting.
Yeah, and then with Keim, generally there were some issues with DUI, and then that was part of the suspension that we're talking about here. Why they needed the burner phones, and then he maybe I'm just not up to it, but he somewhat mysteriously just stepped away after. At this point, was there anything else about that as part of this story? Why he just disappeared?
Well, they said the Cardinals at the time he was taking a medical leave of absence,
right?
And he had the extreme DUI, right? So
yeah,
and in Terry McDonough's complaint, he also said that he had gone to Steve Keim to to raise questions about his excessive drinking, according to Terry McDonough. So when Keim went to the medical leave, when it didn't say, people assumed, okay, is he going to an alcohol rehab type facility? That was never reported or confirmed. But then shortly after that, that would have been in December of 2022. Then in January, I believe, they announced that he had left the team, permanently, and then they hired a new GM, Monty Ossenfort. But when you look at the history here, so Keim had the extreme DUI. Their chief operating officer at the time had a DUI and since left the company. They have Steve Wilkes, their head coach, who is suing them. They have their former number 2 in Terry McDonough, who's filing for arbitration, accusing of unethical stuff. And then I think someone pointed this out to me. I think you could include this. When they did the contract with Kyler Murray, they put in that embarrassing language, basically saying, hey, you have to do your homework, knowing full well, Kevin, the minute a major contract like that is filed, every agent in the league goes, who has a quarterback or whatever, goes and looks at it. They want to see, hey, what did Kyler get, right? Because it'll be reported, but that's not always the exact final thing. So they had to know that people around the league are going to look at Kyler Murray's contract and see the fact that this clause was in there and it was going to get out. I don't know if you would call that retaliatory, but certainly has reflected poorly on Kyler and fed a narrative about him that he's going to have a really hard time getting past, whether it's true or not.
Yeah, it became fodder for a while there on social media. And then in addition to that, I kind of, it popped back into my brain. I'd forgotten about it for a while, but they also had their Sean, I guess it's Kugler. I don't know how you pronounce his last name.
Oh, yeah, the offensive line coach, yeah.
Yeah, so he had some incident down in Mexico City, accused of inappropriately touching a woman in Mexico City before a game that they had there, and then he was fired there too. So yeah, we're talking about a long trail here.
And then he denied it. And not only that, then somebody on his behalf was an attorney on the very day that Keim took the leave or was leaving. Keim was in the news. He put out a thing saying, denying that Kugler was involved in this and saying implying it could be a case of mistaken identity. Then people were posting photos of Kugler and Keim because they're both kind of bigger guys.
They are kind of double.
I mean, which could be totally inappropriate. It could have totally been Kugler. But at this point, what do you believe? It just feels like, I was joking, the other day, I guess you wouldn't want to be fired by anybody, but I guess especially you wouldn't want to be fired by the Cardinals because it seems to be a messy thing.
That's what it seems like.
Yeah.
Well, I guess maybe this goes back to the larger point about ownership. And when we're talking about like major decisions, maybe people don't appreciate major things that are happening. And I think a burner phone being supplied to different people probably falls in this category, but I'm just not sure. Like if it more often than not, like they have their finger on the scale in a pretty large way when it comes to, drafting a particular quarterback, when it comes to signing Deshaun Watson, even though Jimmy Haslam tried to pawn it off on the front office and, even threw his daughters under the bus saying that they approved of it and things like that. Like they have their finger scale on the scale on a lot of these things. I guess I just have trouble seeing a lot of this stuff going on without their approval when a lot of these people are only in the positions they're in because they're in the favor of the ownership in the first place.
Yeah. So you could think this way. Why would an underling risk the ire of the owner by doing this, knowing that it's probably going to get back to the owner? This isn't an owner who's there, right? He lives there. He's in the building.
Everyone's trying to get in the favor of the owner. I mean, eventually that's why all the coaches and GMs, they both are just pleading to the owner why the other guy should be fired when things go wrong. I mean, everything gets back to the owner eventually. That's how it's incentivized.
Yeah, I think there's just more, obviously the Cardinals put a lot out there. This is obviously personal because, so you have to take, I wouldn't say grain of salt, but you have to weigh that in your mind is that, hey, Terry McDonough could be really mad here and really trying to go get the most dirtiest stuff out there. And obviously the Cardinals are doing the same. So, is it 80% true? Is it 100% true? Is one side totally right? Hard to know, but the consequences, I think, like I do, podcast every week with Randy Mueller, former GM, and I asked him on our podcast that posted today, like, how big of a deal would it be for you as the GM to be banned from communicating with your team or anybody from, I think it was like late July to late August. And he was like, it'd be fatal. Like, what could I, you're doing things every day with your roster and you're going to reduce the roster and you're signing different guys. It would be really difficult. So you could see why you'd want to be in touch with your GM.
Yeah, no, I can definitely see that. Just strange story coming out there, which probably more to come for. And I don't know if the tide has turned here, but what we saw with Richardson, the ownership in the
Yeah.
Panthers, we've seen with Snyder. Like, I don't think Snyder's selling if it's not for all of these scandals and pressures and other stuff. I could
Oh
be
yeah.
wrong, but I don't think that happens. You don't know. Maybe the threshold for what can force out an owner is moving down a little bit, especially when you have these like really big moneyed interests coming in ownership now. And they're like, Rob Waltons of the world are like, can we get the Bidwells out of here and bring in another one of my billionaire friends to be the ownership now?
Yeah. The downside of the league, think of this: if Mike Bidwell was forced to sell the team, and let's just say they're not the Washington franchise, but that's $5 billion fee to the league, right? Or it's
Yeah.
$5 billion. I mean, obviously, it's it's not all 5 billion is going to the league, but because Bidwell's going to get money for
Yeah.
selling the team, but the league's going to make a lot of money off of a transaction like that, and then have a much wealthier partner because Bidwell's family's been in it 100 years or longer. This is where they derive their wealth largely, right? These other
Yeah.
people that are coming in now got it any other number of ways.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that's also an interesting angle is, as this starts happening and these franchises get turned over, it can kind of start happening a little bit more often going forward, despite the fact that a lot of these guys have been able to last a long time in the NFL because it's impossible to lose money in the NFL, as opposed to some other sports that are out there.
Yep.
Let's talk a little bit about the Lamar Jackson. I want to talk about this in reference because I wrote a piece on him. One of the points that I brought up in there, thanks to you having some detailed information on the quarterback tiering that was
Oh
going
yeah.
on with Lamar in the past. But I think just generally, you talked about building these relationships, and this is very much it's a survey, but it's also you have to have you detailed the people who are being surveyed here. We're talking about head coaches. We're talking about general managers, in addition to some of the second or third tier sorts of people in the NFL. Like, how do you kind of develop that sort of relationship with these guys that you can get
Yeah.
honest and good feedback from them, and that sort of trust in that relationship too?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Just over time I've learned so much from so many people in the league about uh, football and quarterback play. I think, I enter into relationships with people really trying to learn, not acting like I have the answers. I think when I was first starting out doing this, I relied disproportionately on the data because it's what I could understand. And then what I've learned is that's a piece of it, but there's a whole other world uh, of the way the league thinks about things. And so, a lot of my relationships with people, like I do a lot of research and I share that with people in the league just for conversations and to help myself get better. And sometimes I'll put together things that I think are interesting for whatever team they're doing, things like that. And so there's a little bit of I don't know if the word's collaboration, but just kind of I'm not always going to people asking for things. I think there's real give back and forth, give and take, and that I certainly enjoy and try to think about things in different ways. Having been doing this for 25 years and really the last 10, I'd say, or 12, really being in this kind of realm, where you're thinking about things uh, and having time to think about things, not having to write 3 things a day, I can really synthesize some things in my mind. So, I think a combination of just, the more people then they connect you with other people that they know. Uh, and it's fun. I mean, everybody loves doing, people enjoy doing this thing in the conversation and they're interested in the results and all of that.
Yeah.
And, it helps everybody kind of get a feel. It's kind of a market analysis, really, as much as anything.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Right or wrong,
That's
it could be wrong. You might disagree with some of them, and they disagree with each other. It's funny. The results of the quarterback tiers may not mirror any one voter's ballot.
yeah. Well, okay? So, first off, I think maybe you don't need to psychoanalyze everyone here, but I guess it's my assumption that if they have the right relationship with someone like you, these people see what's going on in the outside world. I mean, they're pretty focused in on what they're doing, working 100 hours a week and all that sort of stuff. But I'm sure people like having their opinions out there also, or having a chance to at very least vent in the form of this sort of way on what they think about these different guys.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I think people enjoy reading it. I enjoy putting it together, and all of that. I think, this is, you know, I sort of the analogy of, what I want this to be is, you, you know, 4 or 5 people in these league roles sitting at the bar, and you're kind of at the next stool, and you get to kind of listen in, and that's kind of the fun part of doing this thing. And you know, I've learned so much. Like I've learned, like I didn't just come up with the tiers,
Yeah, well,
it was
that's what I wanted to ask you
yeah,
about. Maybe we can come into this a little bit here. So
yeah,
maybe I'll step back for a second. So we have
yeah,
5 different tiers, right? That quarterbacks can be placed
yeah.
into, and
There
then you
are,
vote
yeah,
based on
really
the
only, yeah,
tiers,
yeah,
and then it's
Re-
aggregated up, and then you kind of like if
yeah,
more often than not, someone is a tier 1 type of player, they're in the larger tier 1 that you're putting them.
yeah, and really, for actual starters, there's probably 4 tiers. The fifth tier just means you're not even a starter. Like, but I'll have 35 people in the survey to start, more than there are, and no rookies are in it.
Okay.
Because I don't. There's too many people that didn't study them coming out. We need to be able to at least see
Well, they'd probably
something
be
in the
too
NFL.
high or too low. I don't know.
Yeah,
Either
yeah,
one. It's hard
yeah.
to say.
So really, tier one is basically, you don't have really a hole in your game, and you're pretty proficient in the pure pass situations. I think people feel in the league like the game is going to be reduced to you having to win from the pocket as a passer. You can do a whole lot of other things, but that stuff can be taken away, and it will be taken away if you're behind, or you have to put more of it on your shoulders. So the degree to which you can handle passing the ball in less favorable situations, the higher you're going to have a chance to be into tier one. So, like for years, it would be Drew Brees or Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, now Patrick Mahomes. The last few years, he's unanimous tier one. And then every once in a while, you have somebody kind of cycle in a little bit, who's coming off an amazing season, or they'll get right to the border. I don't know if Matt Ryan ever made tier one, but when he was MVP, he might have come close. Uh, and then the second tier is really just kind of, uh, you can kind of do some of that stuff some of the time, but you're a little less consistent with it. And then there's another kind of component in there, like, or if there's another trait to your game that's just so dynamic, that it puts you above tier three. And so sometimes that could be, uh, if you're just a really dynamic rusher of the ball, um, and not quite as good as a passer, that may still push you into the second tier. You can still handle a lot, carry a lot for your team. Really, tier three, sort of what I've always thought of as kind of like the Andy Dalton tier. You're a good starter. You're probably going to get paid, but we could also consider upgrading from you, and you're probably going to be in a situation where they want to limit your exposures as a pure passer, right? You might be more of a play action offense, boot movement type offense. Think of like the way Jimmy Garoppolo has played, right? That sort of a thing would be tier three. And tier four is just kind of, you could be Ryan Fitzpatrick in tier four. We've seen enough of you. We don't think you're really in the top 3 tiers. We may not want to go a whole season with you. Or it could be Patrick Mahomes after his season when he had 1 start. Look, I don't have enough information. I think you're going to be really good. Let's just give him a 4 because we haven't seen enough.
Yeah, yeah. You know
That
what I
yeah,
like about it is in an environment where it feels to me the swings of opinion can be fairly extreme, it actually doesn't vary that much on an annual basis, or there aren't that big of jumps. You mentioned Patrick Mahomes. I mean, this would probably be the biggest jump that I think he had. At the time, it was 55 voters at that point in time. So I think it
yeah,
was something like 46 out of 55 or 45 out of 55 that had him as tier one. So that's a little bit extreme. But we saw Patrick Mahomes in 2018, and then that kind of makes sense. Whereas for Lamar Jackson, we'll talk about this more, even after his unanimous MVP season in 2019, in 2020, during that offseason coming in, this happens every July, he had 16 tier one votes. And if you looked at like the NFL 100, let's say for another marker of opinion based upon what the players were saying, he was number one in the NFL 100, but he still trailed several quarterbacks, didn't make it into the first tier overall when you aggregate things of quarterbacks. I guess, did you kind of agree that maybe there's a little bit more caution to how much people are changing their opinions on players also on an annual basis?
Well, usually you have to prove it a second year. So like Josh Allen's a good example. Okay. So Josh Allen early in his career was overwhelmingly tier 3 and 4. Okay.
Yes.
2019. Then he plays a little bit and he's overwhelmingly tier 3, but he was kind of erratic up and down. Well, then he has a really good year. He gets 20 votes in tier 1, but still 30 in tier 2 because there's a lot of people who just say they want to see it again. That
Yeah.
happens
And
time and again.
I believe he was second team All Pro that year. So I think Rodgers was first team and he was second team All Pro. So he was actually voted above, at least in that measure, Mahomes and all these other guys.
So yeah, Josh Allen, though, in that first jump year when he really made a jump, he went just to the top of tier 2. We see that happen quite a bit. Hey, tier 2, but there's a lot of people say, you know what? Great. It was like a tier 1, but to really get into tier 1, I want to see it again. I think that certainly is probably where Lamar Jackson was at, where it was like, wow, that MVP year, he was so dynamic that it was like, how much are we going to nitpick the pure passing part about it? Because, he's obviously carrying their offense. And then it's been a little bit of combination of, he's probably descended a little bit. Their offense haven't had playoff success. So he just wasn't able to really maintain it. Somebody else who didn't have as great of a year as Lamar, but like early in Derek Carr's career, like he had a spike up where he went way up, and it was like people were kind of thinking, could this guy be tier 1, and never sustained it. And he's fallen into low 2, high 3. Whereas I think Lamar still was like maybe the upper tier 2. I think even last year after missing all those games.
Yeah. Another guy maybe would be for like a 1-year type of situation is Carson Wentz, who after 2017, where who knows? He could have been
he could have been
MVP after that sort of year. But he moved up some. I guess he was ranked 9th here overall for all those things. And again, I believe in the NFL 100, he was ranked 3rd overall after that season. So a little bit more reactive there.
Yeah, but I thought so. So after his first year, or going into 2017, he was 21st.
Yes.
Then he goes to 9th, but he stayed at 10th and 11th for 2 more years. And I felt like people gave him the benefit of the doubt a little longer than he was actually playing that way. Now I'd have to go back and look at it. That was just my impression, because I remember he was at one point he was like, I wonder if that was like the physical traits of him. I felt like, was it Dak Prescott, or there was somebody who was playing at least as well, and I just felt like, for whatever reason, Wentz stayed a little higher, a little longer. Then he just plummeted. Yeah.
The Dak versus Wentz thing was definitely a thing for a while there. Even after coming in the same draft class, where it wasn't like Wentz didn't really cliff dive until we got a couple of years down the road, but he definitely had been declining before that. But I guess what this data, the reason that I was looking at it in reference to Lamar Jackson, is this idea of like, what is he in that bucket of quarterbacks that teams are going to say, and I think a lot of people think he should be, blank check type of guy. We're going to do whatever we have to do to get him. You look at what teams, the Browns did for Deshaun Watson and others. Herbert, Burrow, they're going to get their top contracts. They would probably be seen as being in that same category. Allen, Mahomes in the same category. Now, all of those guys, according to your tiering, had made it into that first tier. Even Watson getting over, let's say, the 25 out of 50 threshold back-to-back seasons after his 2019 and 2020 seasons. But the wording on here, though, again, the focus on pure passing here, is that what's keeping Lamar out? Like, well, how do you?
Yes, I think it is. So here's the difference with Lamar. Here's something that's somewhat unique about Lamar, because a lot of times when you do this, when you put someone through their ballot, the ballot says as much about the person as it does the player, right?
Mm-hmm.
It says how they view the game. So you won't find that are guys like this. Lamar Jackson has 8 votes in tier 1 this last year and 8 in tier 3. Well, come on. How can you have that big of a gap? That's a huge gap, because it's not like he just has 1 vote in tier 1. That's
right. That's 8 people saying he can carry his team each week, and then 8 people saying legitimate starter, but needs all these other
Doesn't
things to
pass well
win.
enough.
That's a
Needs
big
all,
difference.
because the whole team is set up for him to be able to run.
Yeah.
They've changed their whole scheme. So I think that I find that interesting. But it shows you that not everyone's going to be in the blank check category. Now, I think people totally are misanalyzing the situation this offseason because he's a franchise player.
Yeah.
It's not like he's a free agent. There's a whole mess of stuff to navigate because of that, especially because also he doesn't have an agent, which I know you can get a huge contract in the NFL without an agent. And Lamar could, if Lamar's a free agent, he'd get a huge contract. He wouldn't need an agent. But this is a situation where you need to be at the league meetings. Your agent does. When I'm at the league meetings, sitting outside that restaurant, I see 10 agents. I mean, Drew Rosenhaus is sitting there on the phone for 2 hours, calling his clients, telling them this or that. Or David Dunn, top agent, he's there. These guys are there. What do you think they're doing? They're having private conversations with people in the league who they trust to find out exactly what the market is and how we can do this in a discreet manner, right? So that none of that's happening for Lamar Jackson. I think he's at a severe disadvantage to cash in under these circumstances of the tag where the Ravens can match. I think that's the number one thing that's hurting his value. Then on top of that, there's other things like he has had a couple of injury plagued seasons. I think, you know, there's no doubt that people feel his playing style requires a lot of organizational changes with the potential for diminishing returns. Because over time, you're not going to be as athletic as a runner. And then what do you have to pick up the slack in that? How good are you as a passer without that? And there's some real questions about that with Lamar Jackson, that so much of it goes off the running game and his ability to run. And people wonder, how well does that translate in the playoffs? In the playoffs, you're playing somebody their people have been scouting you down the stretch of the season for the last 6 weeks. They've got a plan. It's not we're playing Lamar Jackson for the one time in a 3-year period, and we're coming off of a tough loss, and we don't have our best plan, right? We've seen him be solved in the playoffs. So I think some of that is preventing or stopping people from just being all the way all in that we're going to blow the Ravens out of the water. No one wants to do the deal for the Ravens and show their hand that we wanted Lamar and didn't get him, right?
Yeah.
So you have to go so far beyond what the Ravens would even do and give up the picks. Do you think think of this? Do you think it would be a smart strategy for the Ravens if they signed Lamar Jackson to a deal that was richer than they thought they would ever want to do, and they forfeited 2 first-round picks, just gave them away? Would people be saying, wow, smart move by the Ravens? Like, nobody would say that.
Yeah.
So why should another team go so far beyond what the Ravens would do and give up the picks? I think it's a problematic situation for a player who 8 people think he's in tier 3, 8 think he's in tier 1, a bunch put him in the middle, and no one's really sure what the next few years are going to be for him, the way I feel like they think they can count on a little bit more. Let's just say what Joe Burrow is going to be the next 3 years. Even a lesser accomplished player like Justin Herbert, you feel like you know what he's going to be the next 3 years. I think there's some concern of Lamar Jackson just being an outlier in how much he carries the ball. It's unprecedented. If you do it on if you do design rushes plus scrambles per start, he's like at 9 or 10 a game. It's far beyond what Cam Newton did for the first 5 years of his career. And we saw him kind of diminish. Yeah. Which leads into another thing that people gets talked about. Yeah, Lamar gets hurt passing the ball. No one's worried about Lamar Jackson having a catastrophic injury running the ball. They're worried about him the same way you're worried about a running back wearing down, the same way Cam Newton wore down despite being much bigger and stronger than Lamar Jackson, just because you're running the ball that many times. So I think it'll be fascinating to see. I wouldn't be overly worried if I were him, because if he plays well, he's going to get the deal.
Yeah. I mean, I think the negotiation and the matching is maybe underplayed a little bit, in that this is not, being able to give 2 first-round picks and then just getting Lamar Jackson. This is also, there's almost like a game theory aspect if you're the team who's bidding on him, where you have to figure out what contract can we bid that will not be matched without seeing anything from the Ravens' hand as to what they're willing to match or not in this circumstance. And I've heard some people
Yeah.
say, well, they could try to structure it in a way that it can't be matched, front loaded in a way that can't be matched, but then you have to free up all that cap space in year one before you can make that offer.
Absolutely. And how many owners, this is any team that does this, it's going to be done and decided on at the ownership level. The owner's going to be involved. How many owners have a relationship with Lamar Jackson? How many owners trust that they could have a private conversation with Lamar Jackson and it would stay private forever? None, right?
Yeah.
So in a deal like this, when it gets done, that's why the agent's important for him now. This is not a Laramie Tunsil situation where Laramie Tunsil's in a static situation where he's going to get a deal and he does a great job getting his own deal. I go, excellent job.
Yeah.
You can do this. This is navigating a storm of sorts. You really need someone who's an expert at doing that. Doesn't mean it can't be done. I just think it's harder. I think there's too many teams that are like probably just wouldn't even be sure how they would get involved.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's no precedent, right, for someone being signed off of an exclusive 2 first-round pick franchise tag. Is there for another team?
The non-exclusive one for a quarterback. There's been trades off of the. I mean, I was covering.
There's been trades. There've been quarterbacks tagged there, but in most circumstances, those are quarterbacks tagged where everyone knew no one was going to offer 2 first-round picks and a contract for them.
Yeah. I think that's I think that's inflaming this argument of like, why aren't people going after Lamar Jackson? This is ridiculous. I believe Lamar Jackson would have a tremendous market under different circumstances.
Yeah.
If he was more free to do a deal, I think he'd get a great deal. And I think he could still get a great deal from the Ravens. That relationship is fractured to the point now where I think he's actually probably hurt his perception through this. And what he could really use now, like what he really ought to do, in my opinion, if he's really confident in his ability, is go have an amazing year, pocket your $32 million and flip the tables on the Ravens. It feels like he's not at a position of strength right now with his leverage. And some of that's coming off of a couple of years where he's been hurt. I think also he could really benefit himself in this new Todd Monken offense. Because, right, the questions about Lamar, do you have to run the Greg Roman offense is this going to be like the Kaepernick situation was with Greg Roman, where it goes great for a while, people kind of figure it out, you start to get banged up, and it's declined. Well, if Lamar Jackson were to have a great season in Todd Monken's offense, he's a lot closer to the blank check situation.
Yeah, no, I agree.
But that's going to be really hard to do if he doesn't come in, right? Like,
yeah, will he come in? That's another thing. And then I think part of the Ravens placing the lower tag amount on him was not just like, I don't think they wanted to go through this whole thing and make it a story in the offseason, but when they if they have to put the next tag on them, it would have been cost prohibitive in a way if they put the higher tag on and then they went 120% on the higher tag. Now they're going 120% on a smaller number. So again, from Lamar's perspective, he's going to say, you know what? I just don't even want to sign the tag because I'm going to have a great year and then they're going to tag me again.
Yeah, but if you don't sign the tag, I mean, you're not going to get paid and you're not going to get credit for a season, right?
True. I mean, but I guess there's some question as to whether or not that counts in the formula. I mean, we don't know because Bell's the only one to do it, right? And then he was gone the next year. So
yes, but
that was on a second tag for Bell, though, I think.
So Lamar's tag is $32 million, so it's effectively $2 million a week on an old 16-game schedule. Well, let's just say that's what it is. It's going to be a little less than that. So $2 million a week. So what's the and remember, once we get past July 15th, he can't do a long-term deal anyway. Yeah. The franchise tag player can't do a long-term deal. So what advantage does he have to miss games? He'll lose $2 million a week and can't get a new deal anyway.
I mean, I don't think he does have much of an advantage, but it could be his perspective of this is basically the nuclear option, and the Ravens will trade me. We'll get rid of. They'll figure out some way to get rid of me next offseason.
Or at the trade deadline, who knows? Whatever. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, if that's true,
he has to sign the tag by a certain day, right? Or else they can't even trade him.
He has to sign the tag to be traded.
Yeah.
Period. Yeah. You have to trade the contract. So he would have to be amenable to that. But then you're going to go to a different team. I guess they would have to promise that they would do a certain type of a deal. It's a little
Yeah, I guess
complicated.
it'd have to be.
And look, the criticism of the Ravens is they should have done this earlier. Just do the deal earlier. Get it done. But it's easy to say here in our little little studios.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll be talking about this for who knows? Yeah. Who knows how much longer? Okay, before I let you go here, because I've taken up a lot of time here, anything you want to talk about as far as, I know you got the podcast going on, you got other things going on. Anything else you want to plug that you're working on here, things we can expect in the next couple of months?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, certainly the Football GM podcast that Randy Mueller and I do usually
every Thursday, correct?
Post every Thursday. Yeah. I really enjoy it. I think it's an extension of the conversations that I have and leverage at times in some of my pieces. I learned so much from the people that are really on the inside, and I think, like me coming at it as, really being into the numbers and all that stuff, I love to bridge that divide, right? There's always kind of these two camps of the people that are really like a good phrase, I think, is I want to be data informed, not data driven. You see the distinction? And I think data driven means I don't have the other connections and I'm just into the data. Data informed means I talk to guys like Randy and on the podcast, and the light bulb goes on. Like a light bulb goes on with me once a show or more because of the perspectives of things I just hadn't thought of that way.
Right.
So I want to plug that, but here's an example of something silly that's blatantly obvious that I just hadn't thought of in that way. And it was nothing to Randy. It was just like something off the top of his head. We were talking about the Aaron Rodgers trade and how you would do it, and would you have conditional picks in the future at stake based on whether Rodgers retires or wins the Super Bowl? And this is so silly that I should be embarrassed to have never thought of it. But he goes, one of the reasons I don't like to do the conditional pick deal is then you have to hold on to both picks. So think about that. Like if you were going to if I'm going to have a 2 that could become a 1 next year, that means I can't trade either one in the meantime.
Right.
So I'm being handcuffed right there. Conditional pick sounds like a great way to go. Hey, it could be a 2 if it goes up to the 1, great. But now we can't trade either pick for the next year because I have to wait for that to play out. Well, that takes a big chip off the table for us, right?
Right.
When it's just a throwaway thought in our minds, just do a conditional pick. So those just types, that's not even advanced thinking, but it's just like, that was like a thing. I've never been a GM.
Yeah, I mean,
I've thought a lot about conditional picks.
Being very thoughtful about all the different implications and the second order implications of that sort of move also.
Yeah, so if you have 200 conversations like that a year, you pick up like 15 things. Right? That's what I enjoy the most about it, is like there's so many interesting things to pick up on when you talk to someone who's been doing it for a long time. So anyway, that's what I like about the Football GM podcast and all of the other conversations I have with people like that.
Okay. Well, everyone should be listening to the podcast, reading your work. Mike, for me, I find one of the guys I respect the most out there for everything that you're doing. I think you're doing a fantastic job. So continued success to you.
Hey, appreciate it very much. And let's get together again.